An effective delivery is what makes the difference between giving a speech and giving an amazing speech. For most folks, delivering a speech is a scary prospect, and that's okay. Once you know a little bit more about what kinds of things to think about with regard to delivery and how to practice delivering your speech so that you can deliver it extemporaneously, and you put those good ideas into practice, you should begin feeling a little bit better about the thought of delivering a speech. A good delivery doesn't call attention to itself. In other words, when we're watching someone deliver a great speech, we aren't typically thinking, wow, what a great delivery. Rather, we are more focused on and interested in what the person is saying because we aren't being distracted by that person's delivery style. We also tend to remember more information from well-delivered speeches, and you're more likely to persuade your audience when you deliver your speech as well. Your audiences are going to be way more interested in your speech if you're delivering your speech well. Despite our desires to be good listeners, it's actually really hard to listen to presentations and maintain your attention on the speaker. Therefore, a good extemporaneous delivery is essential to helping your audience pay attention to your very important words. A good delivery also helps build community, which is the relationship between you and your audience members, as well as relationships between your audience members themselves. If a person is performing with a natural, comfortable, conversational delivery style, people tend to feel more at ease. We tend to trust people who deliver presentations better because we translate their ease of speaking to competence about their topic. And people watching a good delivery feel more comfortable with those around them, which helps them feel less on guard during presentations and may make them more open to new ideas. In short, we tend to like people who are delivering presentations well, and likability is a big part of being a memorable and persuasive speaker. One of the first elements of delivery to consider is volume. Volume can be used to emphasize points so that I can make sure you hear this by being louder, or it can emphasize that this is really serious because I'm speaking more softly. You can always look for audience cues about your volume. If the person in the front row is leaning back away from you, that's probably a hint you're talking too loud. If a person further back is leaning forward and looks to be struggling to hear you, you're probably not speaking loud enough. Have you ever been to an event when a person begins by practically screaming into the microphone because they forget it's there? Remember that if you're speaking into a microphone, know that you only need to raise your volume just a little bit when speaking into it. It's the job of the microphone to project your voice, so you don't need to. How fast or slow you speak is also important. The rate of your speech can communicate emotion. So, for example, a fast trend tends to communicate excitement, while a slow rate tends to communicate more seriousness. After all, you wouldn't go to a traditional funeral and expect people to deliver a eulogy with a quick rate, right? This also means that the rate of your speaking may be dictated by the event. If it's an event that's more serious in nature, a slower delivery is probably a better option. Conversely, if it's an event that's more upbeat in nature, a faster delivery might be the way to go. There's one thing about rate of speech that I've noticed in my years of teaching this course, and that's the fact that we tend to speed up when we're nervous. So if you're just barely making the minimum time for a speech when you practice, you might want to consider adding some element of your speech to make it longer, because it's likely you'll speak a little bit faster when you get up to deliver your speech in class. Pitch is something that I'll let you know you have to deal with if it's necessary. High-pitched voices tend to be grating, and low pitches tend to lull people to sleep. So I'll let you know if this is an issue for you. I'll also let you know if you have an issue with being monotoned, though this doesn't happen very often. You'll want to have vocal variety when speaking. That means you'll have both high and low pitches present in your voice. I'll let you know if you don't, and you can work on this. Another element of delivery is the use of pauses. When you're trying to communicate something important, you might pause to communicate the seriousness, since pausing tends to get people's attention, just like I did right then. Pauses can also signal transitions. It's a good idea to pause a little before moving from one main point to the next in your speech. It gives your audience a nonverbal confirmation that you're moving to a different element of the speech. Don't worry too much about what we call vocalized pauses, which are the ums and ahs. If you pay attention to your conversations for the rest of the day, you'll actually notice that you say and ah pretty regularly. The reason that you do this is because we tend to use those sounds as turn-taking devices in conversations. So if someone is pausing to take a breath or thinking about what they're saying, they may say or ah to communicate that they're still speaking and aren't ready to yield the floor to you. So if we use these in conversations regularly, and the goal in here is to learn how to give a good conversational delivery, then they're probably going to end up in your speech. They only become a problem when someone hasn't prepared and practiced enough, because they tend to be placeholders for very long pauses while the student thinks of what to say next. If you're prepared for your speech, it shouldn't be a problem, and unless you hear from me that it is, consider your occasional use of or to be just fine. One thing I've noted in classes over the years is that some people tend to think they're pausing longer than they are. Because they're nervous, they can't stand the silence of a pause, so even though they think they're pausing for effect, they're really not. Practice using pauses in your speech, and even go as far as putting the word pause on your outline if you think that'll help. Articulation, pronunciation, and enunciation are also elements of your delivery to consider, and are often elements of our speech that we garner based on where we grew up. Many of these regional varieties of speech aren't a big deal as long as they don't hinder you from effectively communicating your ideas. Articulation is the clarity of sounds that you produce. I'm from Texas, where you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone actually making the ing sound, because instead of fixing something, we're fixin' something instead. That's an articulation issue, but because people know that we mean fixing, even if we don't say it that way, it's not a big deal. In fact, it's part of my oral signature, or what makes me sound a little bit different from other people, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it doesn't obstruct communication. At the same time, you don't want to sound too pretentious by trying to speak the Queen's English either. If you have an articulation issue, I'll let you know. I'll talk a little bit more about regional dialects in class, because they can also lead to people stereotyping you. Pronunciation is the accepted way a word should sound. If you don't pronounce words correctly, especially if it's a word general audience members expect you to know how to pronounce, it can really hurt your credibility. When I taught at Georgia, I had a student talk about the philosopher Plato. Of course, we know that the name Plato is not pronounced Plato. Her classmates all looked at each other and kind of laughed at the mistake, taking their attention away from her speech topic and probably hurting her credibility as well. If you're not sure about how a word is pronounced, ask someone, or go to an online dictionary that has a pronunciation function and let the computer teach you how to pronounce that word. Enunciation is the distinctness of sounds produced. For example of pure enunciation, look at the video in our Angel folder under Delivery called Boomhauer. That's poor enunciation. To avoid poor enunciation, you want to first make sure that you've got enough pauses between your words, and you want to make sure that you're not mumbling. You also want to make sure that you practice saying unfamiliar words. Your mouth works like a machine to produce sounds. Your tongue, teeth, lips, jaws, lungs all work together to produce sounds, and so enunciation problems can occur when you're using words that you're not familiar with. If you're having to use words that you're unfamiliar with, you need to literally practice saying them over and over again until you've trained your mouth to say the word with no problem. Believe me, it's worth the time and effort. If you get up to speak and flub a word just because you're not used to saying it, it hurts your confidence and can hurt your delivery for the rest of the speech because of that loss in confidence. In other words, it's a simple thing to do to avoid a mistake that causes you to lose confidence while speaking. Another vital part of your delivery is your physical appearance. Your physical appearance can be early evidence of your credibility for the audience. Meeting audience expectations for physical appearance is very important. In some circumstances, such as very formal events where everyone is wearing gowns and tuxedos, the expectations for your physical appearance may be very clear. But in some instances, it may not be as clear. A good rule is to always dress just a notch above the audience. So if they're wearing casual clothes, you'd wear business casual clothes. And if they're wearing business casual attire, you'd wear standard business dress. Other elements of physical appearance to remember include hats, hair, and jewelry. You shouldn't wear hats while giving speech, even in class, because it limits eye contact. Anyone who has hair that's constantly falling into their face should put it back for an event so as not to distract the audience with the constant rearranging of your hair. And no jewelry should be worn that's going to distract the audience, so dangling earrings and other jewelry that makes noise when you move should be avoided anytime you're giving a speech. It's important to remember that people are persuaded by people they deem attractive. Their words are also more memorable. By attractive, I don't necessarily mean that you must look like the latest famous celebrity, although unfortunately that does help, but rather, by attractive I mean that you're someone who people find pleasing to look at, which can be as simple as wearing just the right outfit and having just the right poise for an occasion. How to use your body while speaking is also an important element of delivery and includes how you literally move while speaking, as well as physical gestures you make. The most important thing to remember about your body while speaking is just to be natural. It'll be great if at some point in this semester you can leave the podium and speak for a while, but this is a basic course, so if you need to stay behind the podium all semester for safety, you can do that. If you do choose to move around the room while speaking, just remember to be natural. Don't shift your position as you switch main points as it looks too rehearsed. Move naturally when you move around. Gestures should also be natural. There are some times when you may want to make a certain point, and at that certain point you pound your fist on the podium. In those cases, you can put a note in your outline to help remind you when you need to pound that fist for effect. But don't do things like that throughout your entire speech, otherwise you look like you're overacting or being a robot. As humans, we tend to talk with our hands and gestures, so it becomes natural to us to use gestures while we're speaking. So for most people, it isn't even necessary to worry about using gestures in speeches, they'll just come naturally. If you're too rigid while speaking, though, I'll let you know. One more word of advice is to not speak with your hands in your pockets all the time, and try not to rock back and forth while speaking. It's something that people sometimes do because they're nervous. If you're doing these things, I'll be sure to let you know. One of the most important elements of a good delivery is effective eye contact. Despite the fact that we all know that there will be many people in your life who can look you right in the eye and lie to your face with no problem, there's still an element of our humanity that makes us tend to believe that people are more honest if they're looking us in the eyes, and the evidence actually shows that to be true, that people who aren't telling the truth often avoid eye contact. So looking at your audience in the eyes while speaking is incredibly important. You need to be looking at your audience at least 80 to 90% of the time while speaking. Your book talks about the head bobber, the balcony gazer, and the obsessor. Don't be that person. Look around at your whole audience. Students often make the mistake of just looking at my side of the room while they're speaking in class, but you need to look at other different areas of the room too. The best way to learn excellent eye contact during speeches is to practice and prepare to give an outstanding extemporaneous speech, which is what we'll talk about next. In this class, the type of speaking we'll do is called extemporaneous speaking. This means that your speech isn't memorized and it isn't read. It means that you're familiar enough with your speech to give it using an outline that has keywords and phrases on it. Every time we're in class and I'm lecturing using a PowerPoint presentation, that's just one long extemporaneous speech. I have notes for each slide, and using those notes I can talk about what we need to go over in class each day. You may be very tempted in class to just try and memorize speeches because it seems less scary or even easier to do so. But it's a mistake for two main reasons. First of all, it's a mistake because there will be very few, and actually probably not any, situations in life where you'll be asked to memorize a speech. It just doesn't happen. So you'll be wasting an opportunity to learn to speak extemporaneously, which is something you are probably going to ask to do a great deal in life. Second, please don't try to just memorize speeches because you won't fool anyone in the classroom, least of all me. Remember having to memorize and deliver poetry in high school? Think back to how you memorized those poems. What did you have to do when you forgot something? If you're like most of us, when you forgot what to say next, you had to go all the way back to the beginning of the sentence, and that's because that's how memorization works. You remember word number 4 only if you've said words number 1, 2, and 3 first. So if you try to memorize a speech, you'll spend a lot of time doing so, more time than you'd spend learning to give it extemporaneously, and it'll be obvious to all of us in the classroom that you memorized it anyway, so you'll do poorly on your speech grade. So even though it's tough at first, start working to learn how to deliver speeches extemporaneously, beginning with speech number 1. You'll be very glad that you did. We'll talk specifically in class next time about how to practice your speeches so that you can learn to deliver them extemporaneously.